Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on.
On Halloween night, whispers crawl through brittle leaves. Shadows stretch and twist like thieves. Moonlight drips on hollow ground. Something stirs without a sound. If you feel a cold breath near, run. It followed you here.
Hey gang, happy Halloween. Special thanks to those who submitted a story for this year's Halloween extravaganza. Much appreciated. Before we get into the stories, real quick, some of these stories are a little graphic, and there are plenty of triggers, so consider this your trigger warning. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Happy Halloween, everyone. The Box, submitted by Fortran Lives. When I was a kid growing up, I lived in a fairly typical suburb of a medium-sized city. We lived in a cul-de-sac with a number of streets surrounding us, so there were always lots of kids, a lot of street hockey, a lot of street football, and just a very good group of parents and kids. Everyone seemed to get along, and we always had great times around the holidays, especially Halloween. I, in particular, had 4 guys that I hung out with all the time. We grew up together, we went to school together, and most of us appeared in one another's weddings over the years. This story took place in 1997. We were sophomores in high school and kind of out of the trick-or-treating phase, but we were still into plenty of scares and a little bit of mischief. There was a haunted house not too far from our neighborhood, kind of on the outskirts of town. It had been built in the 1880s, as opposed to the development that I lived in that was built in the mid-1980s. There were so many stories about what had happened out there at that house, from murders to an illegal bootlegging operation, but everything was kind of foggy as to what really happened there. The truth is, I think it was an old farmhouse that fell by the wayside when farming left our community. I probably should do some history on it, but that has nothing to do with my story. People who ventured out there told all kinds of tales of ghosts walking on the grounds, ghosts appearing in the windows, you name it. Ghosts, ghosts, ghosts. So my friends decided on Halloween night in 1997 that we had to go out there and poke around a little bit and maybe see some of those ghosts, ghosts, ghosts. We all knew that it was really off limits to go there. The police would arrest us if they caught us there, etc., etc. But we were determined to find out if anything scary really was going on out there. Because if anything scary was there, why wouldn't it show up on Halloween? We figured that would be prime time for any ghosts or whatever. Most of us had been out there at least once or twice. Almost always the windows were boarded up and the doors were too, to keep people out. So it wasn't like people were constantly coming and going inside and out. But this time, we were determined to get inside. None of us had ever seen the inside of it. Quick note here. You don't hear a lot of these warnings on urbex stories. But you've really got to be careful when you go into an old building. I suppose it goes without saying how dangerous it can be. Rotten wood, rotten floors, rotten staircases. You can get into a world of hurt real quick if you're not careful. Off we went. The 4 of us, ready to get into something crazy and hopefully, from our point of view, a little scary. It didn't take long for us to walk out there, and a couple of people did give us the side eye as we were walking in the direction of the house. If they saw us, they knew full well what we were going to do. Not like everyone spotted us, and we thought we'd be able to get away with it without anyone calling the cops. It was dark, probably around 10:30, and it was a little chilly. I'm not going to lie, it was pretty scary heading out there. When we got up to the house itself, we had to walk through a bit of a field from the road as the old gravel driveway had long since grown over. As we walked up, the house loomed ominously in front of us, and we all held on to our flashlights, whispering and talking about what we might find. We poked around outside and walked the entire perimeter of the house. We didn't really find anything, except the boarded-up windows and doors. But we noticed there was a storm cellar that didn't look boarded over. But it did look like it was locked, not with a padlock, just the kind of lock on a handle. We walked up to it, and my friend Toby kicked at it and then said, "Hey, wait a second." And he reached down and opened it. The door swung upward without a problem. We shone our flashlights down the stairs to another door that would give us access to the basement. We all looked at each other and said, "Well, this is it. We're here. Do we go for it?" We took a vote, and we all decided, oh yes. Toby went first and checked the other door and then turned around and said, "Guys, it's open." We all followed him down and went into the dark, stinky basement. And I don't mean stinky, just as basements are musty in general. But everything reeked down there. It smelled like old vegetation and just the dank, damp earth. It didn't have proper walls. It had earthen walls. And there wasn't much to see in the main room that we had gotten into. There were some old shelves along the walls that looked like they were a mix of mortar and dirt. We looked around to see if there was a staircase to go up to the first floor, but there wasn't one. So unless we went back outside, there was no way we were getting up into the other floors from the basement. Then my other friend Chris said, "Hey, you guys, there's a room back here. There's something in it." So we followed his voice, and being careful not to trip on bricks and other garbage that was on the floor of the basement, we went into the room, and we shone our light on what looked like a long pine box. And I want to stress, it was not a coffin. It was a big box on a pretty heavy-duty old wooden table. Toby went closer to it and said, "Man, this is weird. Check this out." There was some writing that looked like it had been wood burned into it, but we couldn't tell what it said. There was a hinged top on it, and of course we had to take a peek inside if we could open it. We checked around for locks, and there weren't any, so we reached over and everyone kind of pushed it up. And the top was very heavy. When it flopped open, we were in for a surprise, and a creepy one at that. Inside the box, it was set up like a coffin, but it wasn't really a coffin, it was just a box. There were piles of dust and other things in there which kind of looked like ashes when someone's been cremated. But there were the silk-lined pillows and other regular effects that go into a casket. We kind of just looked at it for a minute until Toby pointed something out strange. He said, "Guys, look at this." On the inside of the lid were deep scratch marks and what looked like brown stains in the scratch marks. We also noticed that there were brown stains in the inside of the box, too. We looked at each other and said, "Yeah, this is really weird." Then Chris spoke up. "Oh my God, I think I know what happened here." We looked at him with our flashlights and he said, "Take a better look. These scratches look like fingernail marks." We all looked closer, and he was right. They were fingernail marks. And those brown spots? Definitely dried blood. Someone had either been locked in this box or buried in it, and alive at that. We couldn't believe it. We were asking for something creepy, and we got something creepy as hell. We looked at each other, and Toby said, "Do you guys even want to go upstairs to see what else is going on here?" Everyone decided no. This box was enough for us. We didn't see any ghosts. We didn't hear any ghosts. We just found this really weird box with those marks. So we left the basement with the knowledge that we had just seen someone's personal tomb that they had obviously died in and tried to claw their way out beforehand. We didn't bother closing the lid. We just got out of the basement and quickly made the walk back home. We didn't tell our parents about what we found, but it was told around us friends a whole lot. We didn't go back out there for months. And finally, in the spring, we decided to go back and check on things again. And this is the really strange part. When we did go back exploring around March or so, the box was no longer there. It had simply vanished. We had no idea where it went, I mean, who would have known to go in and remove that if they had known we went out there? But somebody sure did. Did someone see us? Was someone aware of what we found out? I guess we'll never know. Well, the mystery will die out there. That house was torn down about 10 years ago. Very creepy indeed, in a really weird way to spend a Halloween night. Home Alone on Halloween by Anonymous. Halloween has unfortunately never been a big deal out here in Scotland, and that's always bummed me out because I love Halloween. But after this year, I think I'll be happy never to celebrate it again. My street and the next street over have a lot of young kids who go out trick-or-treating, so while I was out shopping all day with my mom, we decided to pick up some sweets in case anyone came to our door. I had plans to go to the cinema to see Ouija with my boyfriend, so when I got home I was getting myself ready to go out and my mom was busy putting the shopping away. So when the first load of kids came to the door, I was the one who had to answer it. There were children from our street, the next one over, and some I couldn't recognize, as well as an adult at the end of the path. I guessed either a father or an older brother by their size, and they were dressed all in black and had some sort of mask covering their face. But it wasn't anything I recognized from a movie or anything. Anyway, the kids all told me their jokes, and I gave them their treats, and they made their way back down the path and on to the next house. I was about to close the door when I noticed that the guy with the kids was still standing at the end of my path. He hadn't noticed, and he wasn't watching the children either. He was looking right at me. And my skin started to crawl when I realized that he was just there staring at me. I backed slowly into my house and watched him as he raised his hand and waved very slowly at me. And I was about to call out to him when my mom came to the door to make sure I was all right. And then he took off in the opposite way from the children. He hadn't been with them at all, and he left as soon as he realized I wasn't home alone. I was completely freaked out and told my boyfriend all about it when he came to the house to pick me up. But I quickly forgot all about it while we were watching the movie. I finally got home when it was getting really late, and trick-or-treating was well and truly over. When I got inside, my mom was just getting ready to take the dogs out for a walk so that they could do their last-minute business, and they would meet my dad on his way home from work. So for a little while, I was going to be home alone. Now, after my horrible experience earlier, I didn't really like the idea of being home alone, and it was only made worse on Halloween. So anyway, there I was, alone. I grabbed some snacks and went to my bedroom and onto my computer so that I could do some of my writing, scroll through Tumblr, and listen to music. A while before this, we had a creepy encounter with some guys that came into our backyard and house. So my dad bought a motion-censored light and attached it to the wall of our house right outside my window. Normally it would go off whenever a cat walked along our fence, but it would usually turn off after a couple of minutes. I always knew when the light had come on because it lit up my whole room, given where it was placed, and while I was sitting at my computer, the light came on. I ignored it at first because I knew it would go off after 5 minutes or so. But after 5 minutes, it still hadn't turned off. So I opened my blinds to have a look outside and see what was going on. My stomach almost fell out of my ass when I looked out and saw the creep from hours before sitting on the fence, waving at my window to keep the light on. His waving slowed down suddenly when he spotted me, and it was all seriously creepy again. I didn't know what to do. I got flashbacks from before. And then luckily I heard the front door open and my parents come into the house with the dogs. So I rushed down the stairs and started screaming at them about the guy on the fence. My dad didn't question me. He just took the dog and rushed through the house to the back door, opened it and ran outside, and then I heard him shouting, "Get the fuck out of here, you creep! I'm gonna call the police." Now that scared him off. I convinced my dad to not call the police because I didn't want to really relive the whole thing again. I just wanted to go to sleep and forget about the whole night completely. Maniac Clown, submitted by Ariel. It was about a year ago that my husband and I bought our new home in a really nice subdivision. It was the type of neighborhood that made you feel safe and warm, where the neighbors greeted you when you came home with a wave and a smile, or beeped at you as you walked down the street or drove by. It had a sense of belonging. The children were plentiful, and everyone had their Halloween decorations up weeks in advance. On the early afternoon of Halloween, I began to feel nauseous at work. I was in my early weeks of pregnancy, and my boss thought it was best to take the rest of the day off, to go home and get a little rest before the trick-or-treaters were coming out. Upon my arrival at our new house, I saw a grown man dressed as a clown walking through my subdivision and randomly waving at cars. Well, at least my car, because there weren't any other cars on my block at that time. As I approached my driveway, I could see the clown down the street walking in my direction. I didn't give it too much thought because, after all, it was Halloween. I thought possibly he was just going to a friend's house to entertain the children. Unfortunately, as I looked around, nobody was home around my neighborhood. My neighborhood had mostly young couples with small children, and at the price of the homes, it pretty much demanded that both husband and wife work. As I pulled into my driveway, I entered through the garage and immediately shut the door. When I entered my house, I had a bag of a few grocery items I had picked up, and I set them on the kitchen table with my phone. As I was doing this, I heard the doorbell ring. I approached the door, and I knew it couldn't be the children trick-or-treating yet, and I wasn't expecting anyone. As I opened the door part way, I could see that same man dressed as a clown standing in front of the door, acting like a mime, making faces with his hands and gesturing for me to let him in. Thank God that door was locked. I told him I couldn't understand him because he wouldn't speak, and I told him that he should leave. At that point, he started to kick the door and became vicious and scared the shit out of me. I immediately shut the inner door, walked over to the front window to see if he was leaving, but I lost track of him, and then I turned towards the kitchen and went to get my phone. Before I could reach the kitchen table, this clown was standing in front of me at the back of the house by the sliding patio doors. As he stared at me and waved, I could see him taking an object out of his waist and prying it into the door. It didn't take me long to figure out what his intent was. I turned and ran up the stairs to the bathroom, which was the closest room, and I shut the door and locked it. I reached into my pocket for my phone, and then it dawned on me. I had left my phone on the kitchen table. Within minutes, I could hear noise coming from downstairs. Then I could hear footsteps coming up the stairs, and I screamed as loud as I could, telling him that I knew he was in the house and that I was calling the cops. He probably saw my phone on the kitchen table and knew that was a lie, because he continued to come up the stairs. As I screamed and begged him to leave, I could hear him trying to get in. I never screamed so loudly in all my life until that moment when I thought I wouldn't see my husband or be around to see my newborn. Knowing that no one could hear me because there were no windows in the bathroom, it dawned on me to scream loud enough so Google could hear me in the next room, and I could ask Google to call 911. As I did this, I know the clown man was listening because he could hear the response from Google, indicating that they were calling. At that point, I sat against the door and prayed and prayed. Within seconds after Google took my call, the pounding on my door soon stopped. 6 minutes later, I could hear the police sirens, and I could hear the police entering my home. They yelled out, "Police department," as they came up the stairs to the bathroom and announced again. I opened the door and pretty much passed out in front of the police officers. Once I was able to talk, I told them what had happened, and they immediately put a call out to stop anyone within a 4-block radius of anyone that was dressed as a clown. One of the officers said he was going to walk through the neighborhood as more squad cars pulled up, and he asked neighbors if he could review their Ring doorbells. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, no one was home, so they couldn't get access to any. As I sat with the police and they interrogated me, wanting to know if I knew anybody that was obsessed with me, knew where I lived or had a beef with anyone, as the officers put it, I assured them that wasn't the case. They continued to scout the area, and by that time some of the neighbors began to come home, roughly around 5:30. The police officers began to ask them for footage from their Ring doorbells. Even though they had my footage from my Ring doorbell and had a clear picture of this psychomaniac, they were still trying to figure out a motive. This was the time I looked at the officers and said, "Well, hey, how about he's just a fucking maniac?" They discovered that my patio door had been entered with the use of a crowbar, but they said that nothing was stolen or nothing looked like it had been touched. Although they ruled out robbery, they didn't rule out that he was going to kill me. It's been a year since this happened, and that Maniac Clown was never caught. No reports came in during that day or evening from any other homeowner, and I now look at Halloween a little bit differently. This year, I made sure that my husband was around me with our newborn child. Now, to say that this holiday makes me nervous is an understatement. I'm just glad I'm here. One thing I'd like to mention: when we bought the home, we did have the bathroom door replaced because it was kind of a hollow door. We had replaced it with a solid oak door a week earlier. I believe that door saved my life.
Halloween Catastrophe, submitted by Leon Ford Jr. the Gamer. In 2016, I was 15 years old, just gearing up for a normal Halloween night filled with candy and door-to-door adventures. That was the plan, until life threw a curveball. Some friends of mine, whose real names I've long since forgotten, we'll just call them Z, X, and Y, hit me up with an invitation that would send a chill straight through my bones. Instead of the usual trick-or-treating, they wanted to visit an abandoned house about an hour away, a towering, crumbling 2-story structure that looked like a forgotten mansion. I hesitated, sensing the deep wrongness in their suggestion, but peer pressure is a wicked thing at that age, and eventually I caved. The second we arrived, an icy dread slithered up my spine. This wasn't just any abandoned house. It pulsed with something unseen, something hungry. Ever since I was 3 years old, I've had a gift, or a curse, depending on how you look at it. I can see things others can't. Figures, shadows, ghostly echoes of people long gone. Normally I brush them off like background noise, but this time, this was different. It wasn't just a ghostly hum. It was a silent scream vibrating through the air. I begged my friends to reconsider, but they just laughed it off. They jostled the door, trying to pry it open without luck. That is, until I touched it. The moment my fingers grazed the old wood, the door creaked open by itself, as if inviting me in. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to run, but I stayed, too scared of being branded a coward back at school. We stepped into the house, and as soon as I was the last one inside, the door slammed shut behind us. My heart hammered against my ribs as we made our way to the living room, a space covered in a faded red rug and dusty abandoned furniture, bookshelves sagging under forgotten tomes and broken cabinets leaning like old drunks. That's when Z pulled out the Ouija board. But not the cheesy store-bought kind. No, this one looked hand-carved. The letters burned into the wood with unnerving precision, and the board practically oozed malevolence. I should have left right then. Every cell in my body told me to.
but curiosity kept me in place, so I stayed. They set the board down, lit a few candles, each flame flickering strangely tall, and Z asked the first question. "Is anyone here with us tonight?" The planchette glided to yes. My mouth went dry, and X leaned in and asked, "How many of you are here?" The planchette shifted again. 1. Then Y asked if the spirit was here for anyone specific, and the planchette answered without hesitation, yes. Fear twisted my gut into knots, and we tried deflecting, asking safer questions like, "What's your name? How old are you? How did you die?" But the board remained stubbornly silent. Only when we asked again, "Who are you here for?" did it finally respond. It spelled out one slow letter at a time. L-E-O. My blood froze. And that was my name. The others turned to stare at me, their faces drained of color, and without thinking, I shot to my feet and spat out, "Sorry guys, fuck this, I'm out." As if triggered by my panic, the board ignited into flames. The candles around it flared, burning tall and wild. Drawers and cabinets flew open and slammed shut violently. Chairs hurled themselves against the room, and books ripped from shelves and spiraled through the air like angry birds. I didn't wait around. I bolted for the window I had quietly cracked open earlier. Without a second thought, I dove out of it, hitting the ground, and ran like hell itself was at my heels. I didn't care that home was an hour's trek on foot. I just ran. Later that night, after I staggered into my house and collapsed in safety, my phone buzzed with messages. My friends described how after I left, the chaos only got worse. Furniture flying at their heads, the thick air would just rage. They barely escaped with a few bruises and a lot of terror. They tried to rope me into more ghost hunting trips after that night, but I refused every single time. Well, except for one. In 2018, 2 years after that original incident, I was 17, older but far from unscathed. I hadn't spoke to my old group in a while, buried deep in my own battles, which is a story for another time. And out of the blue, the group's leader called me, his voice laced with excitement, asking if I wanted to try one last time to see if I could endure longer than before. This time, a strange thrill stirred in my chest. The past haunted me, yes, but it also pulled at me. I agreed under one firm condition. If anything felt seriously off, I wouldn't even set foot in the house. My friend agreed without hesitation. Halloween night arrived, cloaked in an eerie, almost cinematic chill. He drove the long miles to the house with me dozing off in the passenger seat until a few miles from our destination. And then a dream seized me. In it, I stood in the abandoned home's front room, its air heavy and stale. The floorboards groaned under unseen weight, and my gaze was drawn upward. And there she stood. A curvy woman, unnaturally tall, and her fingers grotesquely elongated, her teeth jagged and menacing. I only caught a glimpse of her monstrous form before waking with a jolt. Normally, I would brush off a nightmare like that, but this felt different. I knew she was already aware of me reaching out from the house itself, a red flag if there ever was one. I stayed awake, feeling the atmosphere darken as we closed in. About a mile away, the aura intensified. It was soft, feminine, yet laced with something wicked. Female spirits often mask their malice with charm, unlike the more openly aggressive male entities. But this was different. It was confident and somehow hungry. Half a mile out, even the driver felt it. The tension crackled like static in the car. My face flushed hot, and I was sweating bullets. But still, we pressed on. As we neared the property, barely a quarter mile from the driveway, I spotted her. A figure in the upper left window of the decrepit 2-story house. She was pacing back and forth. She made no effort to hide. Instead, she wanted to be seen. Another chilling omen. I asked the others if they could see her too, and to my horror, they could. Spirits making themselves visible to non-sensitive people meant only one thing. She wasn't just strong, she was inviting us in. We pulled into the driveway, and the woman froze mid-step. I felt it immediately, a twisting pit in my stomach. I could barely breathe, nausea rising. I cracked open the car door to get some air, but as I turned to the window again, she was staring straight at me. For the first time, I saw her face clearly. Round and full, yet hollowed by two black pits for eyes, each marked by a glinting red dot. Her mouth stretched into a grotesque grin, revealing rows of dagger-like teeth, and her long clawed fingers waved at me. That slow, eerie horror movie wave. All fingers moving in unison with a deathly still wrist. That was enough. "Sorry, guys, fuck this," I said, retreating back to the car. They understood, shaken by the sight themselves. But still, they chose to proceed. Just like the last time they tangled with the paranormal, bringing along a Ouija board, despite what had happened before. I stayed behind, clutching my flip phone, trying to call them back, but the signal was dead. So, resigned, I watched them approach the front door. Then I glanced at the window again, and there she was, pressed against the glass. Her grin impossibly wider, her soulless eyes narrowed to slits of malevolent glee. Her clawed hands scraped lightly against the pane as if she could reach me through sheer will. The moment the group entered the house, she broke her stare from me, turning her head sharply toward the staircase, then snapped her gaze back with renewed hunger. Her fingers splayed against the glass, and then in a sudden jolt, she disappeared backward into the darkness. Inside, I heard the sounds of chaos, screams, thuds, frantic scrambling. My blood ran cold, and for 30 long minutes I sat frozen, heart hammering in my chest. Finally, they stumbled out, bruised, scratched, and gasping for air. The backpack that they had carried in, the one with the Ouija board, was gone. Without a word, the leader peeled out of the driveway, driving like a man possessed, and when I finally broke the silence and asked what happened, his voice trembled. "She attacked us," he said. "She wanted to keep us there forever." He refused to repeat the rest of what she had whispered. As if that wasn't horrifying enough, he mentioned the Ouija board caught fire during the chaos and was lost. The ride back was heavy with unspoken dread, and when they dropped me off, I apologized, but told them flatly I was done. No more ghost hunts, no more playing bait for creatures that should be left alone. They respected my decision, choosing to continue their dangerous passion alone, and I wished them luck. Weeks later, when their parents called me frantic, I realized they hadn't come home. Gone. Just vanished. To this day, I have no clue where they ended up, or if they're even alive. Maybe they were swallowed whole by whatever haunted that house. Maybe they're somewhere beyond our reach, trapped in that grim ether. All I know is this. I'm glad I stayed in the car, because if I hadn't, I probably wouldn't be here to tell you this story. The Drifters by Anonymous. One of my roommates and some friends of myself left to go to a Halloween party around dusk one year, and were suddenly catcalled by a group of 3 drifters, or homeless people. We thought nothing of it and went on our merry way on the way to the Halloween party. And about 4 hours later we were going back to our apartment to change shoes. The high heels and messed up streets are hell when you've been drinking. That was when one of the drifters called out to me, "Hey, beautiful, how about a kiss?" Me, being a little drunk and sassy, replied, "No thanks, girls are more my type." To my shock and horror, he said, "Hey, my friend here likes the ladies." And a homeless girl came out of nowhere and proceeded to kiss me on the mouth. My friend picked me up and threw me over his shoulder, and I proceeded to flip the fuck out in my apartment. But then we shrugged it off, and then we were going to venture back out to a bar for another party. Well, somehow at the bar, I got separated from my group in the crowd, and outside I saw the same 3 drifters again. I tried not to show that I was shitting bricks when they asked me where they could find a liquor store. I pointed down the street to a Kroger, and they said, "Okay, you can show us." Now, I'm a small woman, and they shoved me into their vehicle, and I thought naively at the time that they would literally let me out at the grocery store, except it was closed because by now it was after midnight. I pled for them to let me out of the car, but they kept saying the power does what it wants. And then they headed away from the safety of our campus area onto the freeway and out of the state. For the next few hours, I visited 3 states with them while pleading for my life, and I'll never forget how they kept saying, "The power does what it wants," and talking about how they were going to have fun with me. I kind of resigned myself to the fact that I was going to die and I would never graduate college or see my family again. Then they pulled into a gas station and I slipped out of the vehicle to be grabbed again, but this time I screamed my head off for the clerk to help. And that's when they talked about taking me to the cliff. I mentioned to these wackos that my family is full of police officers and that they were probably already looking for me, and how they were committing a federal crime and that I wouldn't press charges if they just took me back to campus. I guess that's when the girl started feeling sorry for me because she started to say, "Guys, she's really scared. Maybe we should just drop her off somewhere. This doesn't have to get worse." So they took me back to the campus area, and as soon as the girl pulled me out of the car, a police officer called my name. The girl just shoved me toward the cop and yelled, "The power does what it wants, and tonight it let you live." I'd never been so happy to sit in a cruiser. The police pursued those people, but I don't know if they were ever caught. Not long after, my roommate dropped out of college to join the military, and I transferred to another school. So, ladies and gentlemen, be careful walking at night to any Halloween parties you might be going to. Keep your cell phone with you if possible, and call the police if you see anybody suspicious near your apartment. I had a brush with death that Halloween night, and I'm so grateful for the time I have now. The Corpse by Anonymous. This was the night before Halloween, back in 2010. At that time, I was a freshman in college living on campus, and that year the 31st fell on a Monday, so students' festivities went on the Sunday before. During the afternoon around 7, I was outside playing soccer on a field near my place, and I noticed an SUV driving by several times. I only noticed this vehicle because we kicked the ball over the fence several times, and that vehicle was present at least twice while we were climbing the fence to get the ball. I didn't think much of it and proceeded to go to a party later that night. My girlfriend, a few friends, and I left around 9:30, and we noticed a helicopter in the sky with a bright floodlight attached to it, seemingly scanning the area. We proceeded to the party and didn't fret over it. The party was on the other side of campus, so we missed all the sirens and flashing lights racing up and down the street. We got back from the party around 11 p.m., and I immediately noticed that not only was the first helicopter still in the air around my own campus apartment, but there was also a steady stream of police cars, ambulances, and fire trucks driving up and down the street nearby. However, none of them had their lights or sirens on, so I wasn't alarmed. The next day, the internet informed me that an SUV was found ablaze in the parking lot, with a woman's body inside. This happened about a half a mile to 3/4 of a mile from where I lived. I guess during the party, the area was crawling with police and other authorities trying to look for clues. My roommate later told me that there was non-stop sirens for a good 20 minutes after I left for the party. In the next few weeks, more information that a man killed his wife and then tried to burn her body. He broke her neck as well as bludgeoning it too. If the news article I read is to be trusted, the killer was lighting his wife's body on fire, the same time I was getting dressed up in my Woody costume for a party. It wasn't until a few weeks later that I made the connection with the SUV I saw while playing soccer earlier in the day. I find it very chilling that while I was playing soccer, someone was driving within 20 yards of me with a corpse in the car, especially since it was on the campus of a seemingly secure university in a very safe city. Newtown Bad Halloween, submitted by Fozzie. When I was 16 years old, my parents had been split up for about 3 years. I'd been living with my dad, but he was taking a new job that was going to require him to go overseas quite frequently. The decision was made for me to live with my mom, who now lived in Southern California. I loved living with my dad and was going to miss that, but I knew it was going to be hard for me to be at home doing all the things that I did, with no way of getting around without my license, which I wasn't going to be eligible for another few months. So off I went to Huntington Beach, California. This was in the beginning of September, and of course I was nervous about going to a new school. I think all kids are. My mom was over the moon to have me with her and had just bought a new house, so I was going to have my own room. Prior to that, she had lived closer to LA in an apartment, and when I visited, I slept in the living room. So when I got there, the first couple of days were getting used to the neighborhood and getting my room all set up, buying some new furniture and clothes, that kind of thing. I was kind of shy, but not really. I was into skateboarding and punk music, so this was kind of a mecca for me, and I was hoping to fall in with some of the locals out there, which I did. However, I also hung out with a guy I met there on the first day, and his friends, who were skaters but not as into skating as the other guys. I mean, they were, but they were a little rougher around the edges. If you're a skater, think tracker guys versus independent guys. They were all super nice to me, and I was amazed at how well I was acclimating after the first couple of weeks. I wanted to play football too, but that season was already underway, and that was just not going to happen. But I had friends in that crowd too. It's funny looking back, but I really was that guy that was friends with everybody, no matter where I went. The smart kids, the rough kids, the jocks, the skaters, you name it. After about a month of working on those relationships and skating a lot and working on my studies, as my parents were strict about doing well in school, I got invited to a Halloween party. A lot of people were going to be there, so I knew it was going to be a blast. But my friend, and I'll call him Randy, from the rougher skate group, said that a group of them were going to pregame. Gosh, I don't even think we called it pregaming back in 2003. Before going to the party, I thought that would be an awesome time. My parents were also very lenient with me about my personal life and where I went and what I did, as long as I followed the rules about being where I said I was, and if I was going to be out past 11, to call them, tell them where I was, and I did have a maximum curfew of 12. That still stood in California. So I was excited to go, but I didn't have a costume. It was going to be a costume party after all. Randy told me that they were all going to dress up like Ghostface from Scream. We were all going to wear black hooded robes with the Ghostface masks. So my mom and I tracked one down, and I was fired up about going. I should mention that some of my other skate friends were also going to the party. I mean, they got along with the rough guys, but we all skated together. And I guess, well, I could say that the nicer guys were a little bit wary of the others. Like I said, we all skated together, but not everybody hung out afterwards. And I spent time with both sides, but because Randy and his crew invited me, that's who I was going to go to the party with, and then meet up with everyone else. Randy lived a couple of streets away from me, so I walked over with my stuff, and we hung out at his house for a little while. His parents weren't home, and we had a couple of beers, and some of the guys smoked up. I'm not against weed, I'm just not into it. Not then and not now. I didn't partake in that, just had a few beers. As it got closer to the time to go to the party, one of Randy's friends, who I'd never met, showed up with his mom's minivan. Yeah, super cool. a bunch of skate dudes going to a house party in a minivan. But I didn't care. I was having a good time, and everyone else was too. We drove to a convenience store before going to the party to get some more beverages. 3 of the guys went into the store, including the driver. Randy went in with them as well, and I was just hanging out with another guy I'll call Paul. The 2 of us were just chilling in the minivan, sipping on beers, when all of a sudden we heard a loud noise, which, through the insulation of the car, sounded like a firecracker. Suddenly, all of the guys from our gang came barreling out of the store, jumped into the minivan, and the driver slammed it into reverse, knocking all of us around like little bowling pins. I was shocked and was asking what the hell was going on. When I looked up to see the owner or clerk or whoever come out of the store holding his side, it looked like he was covered in red paint. It didn't take a genius to put 2 and 2 together and figure out that somebody in our group had shot this guy. The guy had a phone in one hand with his other hand pressed to his hip that was bleeding profusely. I mean, it all happened so damn fast that I don't even remember pulling out of the parking lot and speeding off down the road, cutting off a couple of other cars in the process. The guy at the wheel started driving what I thought was like aimlessly around with everybody in the minivan yelling, going, "What the fuck? What the fuck?" Well, it turns out this guy, Randy's friend, was trying to buy beer with his fake ID, and it wasn't good enough, and the clerk didn't want to sell it to him. So, in front of everyone, and to everyone's shock, including Randy, the guy pulled out a gun and threatened the guy. The guy, in turn, I think, hit a silent alarm which pissed the guy off and caused him to shoot him. He grabbed the beer and everyone ran out, and that's where we were at that point. I just sat there realizing, holy shit, I was just part of an armed robbery and a shooting, even though Paul and I had nothing to do with it. The guy drove around all over the place, all around these streets, and everybody was just going out of their heads yelling and screaming, saying, "What the fuck? Pull over! What the fuck, man?" My most vivid memory of that night, other than seeing that clerk standing there bleeding, was everyone just not knowing what was going on. Finally, someone yelled at the driver, "Asshole! They know we're in this vehicle. What the fuck are you doing?" And the guy said, "Doesn't matter. This is stolen anyway." Yeah, he had told us it was his parents, but apparently that was not the case. He pulled into a little park and said, "Everybody out." And we all just started running through the park, not knowing what direction we were going in or what we were doing, just knowing that we had to get the hell away from that car. Eventually, we all stopped for a minute in this little group, and the guy looked at everyone and said, "Nobody says a word about this to anyone." The look in his eyes was nothing but anger and fury. I knew he was not fucking around, and I was scared to the bone. All of us were. We eventually figured out where we were, and we went to the party after all. I mean, all of us were still shaking like leaves and wondering what was going to happen. Were the cops going to find us? Should we turn this fucking maniac in? We were all having our own little discussions at the party, and I'm not going to lie, I was sick to my stomach. Even though I was feeling queasy, I had a beer and eventually calmed down a little. And my other friends were asking what the hell was going on and that we all looked terrible. I didn't say a word. Randy came over to me finally and pulled me out into the backyard. He lit up a cigarette, looked at me and said, "Dude, I don't know what we're supposed to do here." I just said, "I don't care. Right now, I'm going home. I'm getting the fuck out of here. And I'll tell you what, Randy, I'm not going anywhere near that guy again." Randy agreed with me, and it turned out that some of the other skater guys were going to another party. Randy, Paul, and I fell in with them and left the other guys there at that one. The fucked up thing is this. Nothing ever came of it. I mean, yes, it was reported in the news, and obviously someone had been shot, but the police, though finding the other vehicle, had nothing to go on. Basically, this guy, Randy's friend, got away with armed robbery and shooting another human being. Over the next couple of days and weeks, I would see that guy walking around. I never looked at him and I never talked to him, and he never approached me. None of us said a word, but around Christmas time when I went home, my dad asked how everything was going, and I finally told him what had happened that Halloween night. He looked at me and said, okay. That's all he said at first. He didn't really know how to advise me. I mean, what was he supposed to say? Go turn yourself in? My dad really wanted the best for me. He didn't want me to be a coward, and he wanted me to do the right thing. But he also knew that he couldn't protect me, and he had no idea who this guy with the gun was, and didn't want me to get in any more danger. I mean, part of him also probably didn't want me getting into any trouble. But he also knew that there was a right way to do things and a wrong way. He told me to contact the police anonymously, let them know what had happened, and to leave it at that. Yeah, it sounds like the coward's way out, and I'm sure a lot of people are going to have some shitty comments about my dad. But I honestly think we did the right thing. When I went back home to Huntington, I called the cops. I found a payphone, made the call, and the police were actually very attentive and understood my situation, although they did their best to tell me that I should go in and turn anybody else in who was involved with it. There was no way I was going to do that. 2 weeks later, my mom came into my room with a look on her face that was not good. She calmly told me that my father had told me that I had told him what had happened, and she was really upset that I hadn't told her. She understood that I didn't want to cause any trouble, that I wanted to fit in, that I just needed to do all these things. But it was a very serious matter. Basically, she decided right then and there that I wouldn't be staying in Huntington anymore. I was going back to live with my father. I can't say I blame my mom. I mean, I was pretty mad at her at first, but I understand her side. I held a grudge for a little while, but we've since reconciled everything, and our relationship is great. But at that point, I violated her trust so much that she just couldn't have me out there. Bad mom, good mom, I don't know. She is a good mom. In my mind, everything is solid now. It's been many, many moons since that night, and while I still talk to Randy occasionally, that situation comes up rarely. No one really said anything about it, and Randy told me the guy who had shot the guy in the store actually got shot himself about 6 years ago. He never was a good guy at all, and Randy regrets to this day mixing me and all of his other friends up with that guy. So, yeah, that was the craziest Halloween experience I've ever had. Wanted you to know, and I hope you'll read this. A Halloween story submitted by Anonymous. This may not be the scariest story, but it's pretty creepy and was definitely scary to me at the time. This happened back when I worked as a swing shift caregiver med tech. I had done this work for years, but this specific company was fairly new to me as I had recently relocated. Every year, it was the company tradition to allow residents to hand out candy to trick-or-treaters. Sadly, it wasn't the best area for that, so not many would stop by. The few that did show up brought such joy to the residents as they handed the kids their candy, though. This was all explained to me, so I was ready with a bowl of candy that night. During the evening, there was a knock at the door, and I went to see who it was. For the residents' safety, this was a locked facility, and you could only enter it with a code. When I reached the door, I peered through the narrow window next to it and was surprised to see a young man, around my age, by appearance, definitely not a child. That threw me off, but I stupidly assumed he was the son or maybe grandson of my coworker that night, and I didn't want to be rude by asking directly, since I was extremely timid, and my coworker was standing right there. The person wasn't in costume, but I gave him candy, and thankfully he went on his way. After he left, I finally asked if he was her son or whatever, and her reply gave me the chills. She assumed that I knew him. Again, this isn't totally horrifying, but we were two wimpy females in charge of the safety of 15 elderly people, and we opened the door at night to a total stranger. It just spooked me when considering the risk I had put us all in. The reason I felt this way is that a young guy did show up at night at a later date, and he was totally nuts. He became irate with my coworker who refused to let him in so he could use our phone. He banged on the door and window. We told him to get lost or we'd call the police. I have no idea if it was the same guy, but it taught me to be more mindful of the things around me, more suspicious of strangers, because crazy can pop up when you least expect it. Visit from a Murderer by Anonymous. This incident happened to me last year on Halloween. My little brother and I were home alone since our parents had gone out to a Halloween party, and they had tasked us with handing out candy to the trick-or-treaters. This bummed my brother and I out because we had made plans to go trick-or-treating with a few friends. My parents told us that we were too old to still be trick-or-treating and that we could instead invite our friends over to the house and hang out there. My friends declined my invitation to come over because they still wanted to go trick-or-treating themselves. So that left me home alone with my brother handing out candy. A lot of people stopped by our house, and by 10 o'clock almost all the candy was gone. My brother and I decided that we'd just eat the rest. We were sitting on the couch watching a scary movie, stuffing ourselves with candy, and there came a knock at the door. I stormed off the couch wondering who the hell would be knocking on our door that late. I assumed it was just some late-night trick-or-treaters. And even if that was the case, I turned the porch light and Halloween decorations off, which should have been a dead giveaway that we were out of candy, or that we weren't home. So then I assumed it was my parents. Being cautious, I looked through the peephole and saw a suspicious man standing on our front porch. He was wearing a black hoodie with the hood over his head, which made it difficult to see his face, and the only detail of his face I could spot was that he had a beard and dry, crusty lips. There was no way that this guy was a trick-or-treater because he wasn't wearing a costume and was far too old to be trick-or-treating. His hands were stuffed in the front pocket of his hoodie, and he also looked very thin. Every single red flag went off in my head about this guy. There was no way in hell I was going to open the door. Still looking through the peephole, I watched as he knocked on the door again. He seemed desperate for us to open the door and was shaking a bit. It wasn't cold outside, and definitely not cold enough for someone to be trembling. He was giving me a bad vibe, and I wanted to get rid of him as soon as possible. "We're out of candy," I shouted to him, and I watched as a smile spread across his face. It wasn't a friendly smile either. "Are you alone in there?" he asked, almost in a mocking voice. His voice was raspy and dry. "Should I call the police?" my brother asked me quietly, gripping his cell phone. The man let out a low grumble and said, "Sounds like you're not alone in there." I continued to watch him through the peephole. His hands were still wedged tightly in his pockets, and he was still shaking a bit. I began to wonder if he was armed, and I decided to take action and spoke to him in the most intimidating voice I could. "Get the fuck away from my house or I'll call the police," I shouted. His smile faded and he bared his teeth. His teeth were piss yellow, and I concluded that he was probably some homeless crackhead. And he had a look of fury plastered on his face. Unfortunately, he left without trying to break in, because probably he knew I wasn't fucking around with him. I didn't stop watching him through the peephole until I saw him completely off our property. My brother and I breathed a sigh of relief and decided to not call the police. But we were a bit paranoid after that and watched TV until our parents came home. We didn't tell them about the man because he hadn't really tried to harm us. But now when I think back on this, I wish we had called the police, because maybe we would have been able to prevent a murder. You see, the next day we found out that the elderly woman who lived a few houses down from us had been brutally murdered. Her neighbor found her lying on her front porch covered in blood. She'd been stabbed multiple times in the chest and neck, and my brother and I immediately knew who had done it, and we told the police what we knew. They really couldn't do much from the information we had given them since we hadn't seen many details of his face, and they went on the hunt for the man, but they never caught him. For a long time I blamed myself for that poor old lady's murder because I could have prevented it from happening if I had just called the police. I think the most disturbing thing of all is the fact that he didn't take anything from the old lady's house. Her house had been left untouched, but he could have gone in and taken anything that he wanted since her door was wide open. That means that he just wanted to kill. That was his only intention. He didn't want money or jewelry. He only had the urge to murder. Halloween Time Horror at College, submitted by Not So Ditzy Now. This terrifying experience happened to me when I was a freshman in college. It's something that sticks with me today for obvious reasons. It was the most fucked up thing that anyone could ever do to anyone else in my mind. Although I'm sure there are a lot of other things in this world that happen that people also think are just as fucked up. Anyway, when I was a freshman, I was attending the college of my dreams in New York State. I was full of wonder and awe at the entire campus from my first visit, and the school had a major that was something I had been interested in since I was a kid. I did well enough on my SATs and ACTs, yeah, I took them both, to easily get in, and I was just stoked. The other thing that was great was my sister, who was 4 years older than me, had also gone there and had a great experience. Or so she said. From the first day, it was just that massive onslaught of classes, and looking for other activities to participate in, making new friends, and of course, Greek life. My sister had been in a sorority, and she highly encouraged me to rush the same one that she was in. If you're not familiar with the Greek system, I was considered a legacy because of this. So basically, I was a shoo-in to be accepted. I was asked to be in a couple of other sororities, but I knew that my sister had such a wonderful experience at hers and made the choice easy. I didn't even bother with the other ones, and I planned on rushing hers. I went to the parties and did all the other things with them, and I met a lot of really good people, and my roommate was also rushing, so that made it super cool. We did all of the things during rush week and were having such a good time and looking forward to being with a group of girls that we almost immediately looked up to. Things were going awesome. I loved my classes, I was making awesome friends, and the parties were knockout fun on the weekends, and I was just of the air that my life was beginning. Rush week was the week right before Halloween. My roommate and I were both accepted, and there was a really beautiful ceremony to mark the occasion, and then also what was planned to be a huge party celebrating us as well. We were on top of the world. And like I said, life was beginning and things were just awesome. The party that night, though, however, was where things completely changed for me. Normally these parties that are sanctioned by the sorority don't involve alcohol or anything like that. Oh, come on, it's college and you all know what happens at college. And I'm not knocking parties either. Like I said, I had a blast at all of them. This one was held at the house of a bigger sister, and it was going to be really great because of this occasion. My roommate and I got dressed up, and another big sister drove us out to the house, which we could have walked to. But for some strange reason, I thought rolling up to a party in a car rather than walking like a regular college student was that much more exciting. We got to the party, and everything was awesome. Now, I want to take a minute and talk about hazing. A lot of people will lie to you and say that it doesn't happen. And there was some hazing during rush week, but none of it was that big of a deal, and it wasn't like drinking to excess or taking drugs or putting anyone else in danger. So I thought everything was great. But back to the party. About halfway through, our big sisters told us to go up to one of the bedrooms, and there was a special surprise for us. We had no idea what it could be, but because we had been getting gifts from them for our indoctrination, we didn't think anything of it. I wasn't drunk by any means, but I did have a couple of rum and cokes in me. My roommate was about the same. So we went up to her room, and it was very quiet up there, I do remember that. Of course there was music and everyone talking and having a great time downstairs, but everything just seemed so muffled up there. Something just seemed too quiet. Then I got to say it was a little unnerving, but exciting at the same time. I went into the room first and noticed right away something was strange. The lights were off, and that took me aback. If this was going to be another fun celebration, why the hell was it dark? Suddenly I was yanked forward by some unseen hands. The same thing happened to my roommate, and we both gave out little gasps like, "What the hell?" After a couple of seconds of that first small shock, I realized that the hands grabbing me were not female. I started to say something to my roommate, but a hand clapped over my mouth and a husky male voice said, "Shut up if you know what's good for you." Before I knew it, I could feel another hand grabbing my breasts. That initial panic is one of the scariest things that anyone can go through in life. And I wasn't buzzed enough for it to be like, "Oh, gee, this is happening." No, this was an immediate, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God" situation. I tried to scream as best I could, but the voice just kept saying, "Shut up, shut up." I heard another voice saying the same things to my roommate, and now I knew we were in trouble. The hands groped at my pants and were awkwardly trying to pull them down, and I can't tell you how scared I was. I was really freaking out, just terrified. Outside of everything that had been happening with the sorority, all I could think about up to that point was Halloween, and a party that the girls were going to be throwing as a sorority. I mean, this night was supposed to be one of the best of my life, and now this was happening. It never dawned on me that my sisters had told us to walk into this situation. More on that later. So I fought and finally elbowed my attacker. It caught him right under the chin, and suddenly he let go of his grip and just yelled out, "Damn, girl, what are you doing?" And I immediately thought, what the fuck do you mean, what am I doing? You're fucking attacking me. The voice then said, "Jesus Christ, it's just a joke, it's just a prank." That came right after my roommate had somehow spun her attacker around and kneed him in the balls. Suddenly the lights came on, and our big sisters came in, laughing. They thought this was funny as hell. Yeah, back to hazing. This was their version of just a hazing prank. For some reason, they thought it would be funny to put girls through this, and they started telling us to calm down as I was screaming at the top of my lungs, "What the fuck is wrong with you?" The two guys just kind of stood there dumb. They were the boyfriends of the two girls. Yeah, our two big sisters' boyfriends. Before they could even try to explain anything, I grabbed my roommate and ran out of the room, down the stairs and out into the night. We were both crying, and I mean sobbing, tears just running down our faces. We were shaking like leaves with our big sisters chasing after us, saying, Wait, come back, it's not a big deal, it's okay, you're safe." I told my roommate, "Just run as fast as you can." Thank God we were wearing flats. We hauled ass back to our room, right past the RA who was watching the front door. Didn't say anything to her and didn't answer any of her questions about if we were okay. We got into our room and collapsed on my bed, just holding each other and still crying and crying. We couldn't even really talk. Then there was a knock at our door, and it was our RA, and she asked if we were okay, and I feebly said, "Yeah, we just got scared by some Halloween pranksters." I didn't want anyone to know what had just happened. Not just yet. The phone immediately rang, and we didn't answer it. Now, I didn't have a cell phone yet, and this was back in the time of landlines and answering machines. And our answering machine just kept blowing up with calls from our big sisters, asking us if we were okay, and telling us to come back, and that everything was okay, everything was fine, we weren't in any danger. I thought, fuck these bitches, and after a little while the phone stopped ringing, and someone started knocking on our door. It was our big sisters, pleading with us to open the door and come out, but we didn't. We just sat there holding each other until we passed out from the exhaustion. The next morning, our big sisters once again came to our room and tried to get us to go out for breakfast, apologizing and telling us that it wasn't what we thought it was, that we were okay, and that they still wanted us to be in the sorority. We didn't answer the door, and they just sat outside pleading with us until someone down the hall told them to go away. It was too early for that kind of talk and that kind of loudness. When they left, I immediately called my big sister, my real big sister, at home. She answered the phone groggily, and I just started screaming at her about what had happened. And this is the most fucked up part. My real-life big sister told me that it was okay and that I was blowing things out of proportion, and that if nothing really happened, then it was all part of becoming a sister in the sorority. I didn't even have any words for her. She kept telling me that I needed to grow up and get over it, and that I was blowing a huge shot in my life. I just hung up the phone with her, totally dejected. I wanted to call back and talk to my mom, but I didn't want her to know what had happened either. And for some strange reason, I wanted to protect my big sister because I knew if my parents found out that she had allowed something like this to not only happen to her, but to happen to her little sister, heads would have rolled. Needless to say, I didn't end up going through joining the sorority. Both my roommate and I backed out and avoided all of those girls like the plague. Of course, we did see them all over campus and at other parties, which I didn't go to for a couple of months after this. I barely left my room other than to go to classes in the library and some other activities. I always went with a friend of mine that I had met who was this big burly guy that had no interest in dating me, but was just a good friend. After a while, he found out what had happened to me and said he would always protect me and my roommate. So, anyway, without going into anything else, I think this is enough for one creepy Halloween story. Yeah, I didn't even go to that Halloween party that year that I was looking forward to. I was just too damn scared. Always looking over my shoulder, constantly being afraid to go out of my room at night, constantly being afraid to walk from building to building at any time of day. I can't stress enough how much this affected me for many years. This isn't a story about putting down Greek life, because I'm sure lots of people had great experiences wherever they went. But I guarantee you, mine was not a good one. I'll just leave this as a warning. Be careful of who you hang out with and what you do when you go to college. It's a very different world out there from high school. You never know who to trust and what can go south. And some people you think are on your side aren't. I also hope this story isn't too jarring for anyone listening to it, and it's not too triggering. In the end, yeah, I suppose everything was okay, and I learned a lot more that night than I did in any of my classes. Everyone, stay safe, be vigilant, watch out for your friends, and I really hate to say this, but trust no one. The Creepy Kid by Anonymous. My dad was the coolest guy on the block. Probably because he was one of the 3 black dads who lived in our town. The population is around 98% Caucasian, and that's not an exaggeration. My dad was a state police officer. Intimidating, wore oak leaves before the hipsters, and he was generally a rough-sounding person. And he died, and damn do I miss him. But the only thing he ever feared was Halloween. He would tell my sister and I stories at night about his life when he was in high school, in a slum in New Jersey, and how every Halloween crazy things would happen. He may have been pulling our legs a bit, but we didn't care. When Halloween would roll around, he would take us out while my mom stayed home to pass out candy to the trick-or-treaters. One night in 5th grade, Lexi and I were dressed as witches in 1950s poodle skirts. Dad was holding Lexi's hand as they walked to the last street, when I realized I'd lost my mom's scarf she'd let me borrow. She loved that thing, so we walked all the way back towards this darker corner of our street. It was by the woods and a small stream, but when it was dark you couldn't see anything. but Dad said he'd seen something and walked towards it. When he got there, he started slowing down, and he was staring at something in the dark that we couldn't see. Lexi called out to him and asked if he'd found Mom's scarf, but he just told her to be quiet and started crouching down, looking in the distance. For several moments, we stood there waiting, and I could make out the scarf above his head tied to a branch. He grabbed the scarf, still staring into the dark, and then started backing away. Then my dad yelled and sort of shuffled backwards. It was a low, throaty scream, like he was furious. And he was swearing too, but I don't remember what. Whatever Dad had been staring at, then bolted out of the trees and ran down the street opposite of where we lived. It was a little child, probably a boy from his silhouette shape and the black costume he had, with skeleton bones on the front and a skull mask. When Lexi and I tried to go over and see what had happened, Dad yelled at us to stay back. He got onto his ancient cell phone and called Mom to come pick us up, and his next call was to the local police. We left before we could see anything, but the next day, my mom told us about all these dead, skinned animals that had been found in the woods. By the time us kids could go back, the police had taped off a section of the woods and had taken out the bloody animals, but there were still stains on the pavement, and the smell was really bad. The kids talked about it a little in school, and I was curious if they ever caught that boy. Everything came out in the local papers, though, and after a while it was quickly forgotten. Eventually, I know my dad would have told us more, but unfortunately that was the last Halloween we'd ever spend together before he passed. The Gravemarker, submitted by Dar. The year was 1999, and my ex-husband and I were living in Missouri. My boys were just babies then, 3 and 1. We'd found a charming old farmhouse in the country, and the rent was very affordable. It was a 2-bedroom home that was situated at the top of a hill that you had to drive up a long gravel driveway to get to. On the property were several old farm buildings, and one could tell that in its day it was top of the line. I assumed by the metal awnings over the windows that it was a thriving farm in the 40s or 50s. At any rate, we fell in love with it and settled right in. We didn't live there that long. If I had to guess, probably no more than 5 or 6 months. In the beginning, nothing seemed out of place, and we were quite happy there. Although at night I would go and sit in the screened-in sun porch that overlooked the old buildings, and always felt like I was being watched. I would always hear noises coming from the property at night, but that was to be expected out in the country. Needless to say, I would make my smoking trips limited. We'd moved in around May or June, and now Halloween was just around the corner. My ex and I were out in the yard with the kids and looking at the old original well one day, and it had been sealed and shut, and we wondered why they quit using it. The owners had dug a new well and put a well house around it, and I don't remember how we ended up standing in the well house, but there we were looking down into the well. I made a comment on how creepy it was and wondered how deep it went. And as we were looking down into this black hole, my ex-husband said, "Wait a minute, I think I see something." And with that, he climbed in just a little, and then after a few minutes came back out with something wooden. He handed it to me, and I looked it over. Because Halloween was just about a week away, I assumed that one of the previous occupants had made us some kind of Halloween decoration and thrown it down there for some reason. I decided it would be perfect out in the front yard, and I leaned it up against the fence. It looked kind of like a grave marker. I didn't give it any other thought, but that's when everything began. I had noticed our oldest boy, who was 3 at the time, start to detach from his brother. I would find him in different parts of the house playing by himself and talking to someone, and I kind of wondered why he had quit playing with his brother, but again, another thing I didn't think too much about. This went on for a few days. Then one afternoon, a couple of days before Halloween, we were having lunch and I called him into the kitchen to eat. He came in, engaged in full conversation with no one. I asked him who he was talking to, and mind you, he was 3 and his vocabulary was pretty limited. He answered, "My friend." And I said, "Oh, that's nice, buddy. Is your friend nice?" And he replied with a nod. More curious, I asked, "What does he look like?" And then he just shrugged his shoulders and said, "I don't know, I can't really see his face." I'll admit I was a little caught off guard by that. And following that conversation, I wouldn't allow him to play alone anymore, and he had to quit talking to this imaginary friend during the day, and once again, he would play with his brother. It went on like that for another day or so, and I thought that perhaps whatever was going on had passed. That is, until I woke up in the middle of the night to him crying and shaking me. I assumed he had a bad dream and carried him back to his bed. And when I put him back in bed, he just sat up and told me he didn't want me to leave. So I softly sang him some songs and reassured him that it was only a dream. He eventually laid back down and went to sleep. But on the day of Halloween, I decided to play a game of hide-and-seek with my boys, as we had all the time. I stood in the hallway and counted to 10, and in that hallway there was an odd cupboard that was the length of the hallway, but only about 3 feet in height. As I was counting to 10, I heard the cupboard doors open, and naturally I thought that the boys had chosen to hide there. So when I finally got to the count of 10, I called out, "Ready or not, here I come." And I started heading towards the cupboard, which I noticed one of the doors had been cracked open. Completely convinced that my kids were hiding in there, I tiptoed over to it and swung open the doors with a boo! To my surprise, they weren't in there. I found it a bit odd, but that was it. And when I did find them, they'd been hiding in the back of the house in the laundry room. We went out and did our trick-or-treating that night, and everything seemed like it was fairly normal. We went back home, had a couple of treats, and then settled in for bed. That night, a little before midnight, I awoke to my oldest boy screaming in his room. I rushed down the hall and into his room to find him sitting up in his bed, shaking and crying. He seemed really upset, and I asked if he'd had a bad dream. He said no. So then I asked him, "Why are you crying?" He then pointed to a set of cupboards in his room. These cupboards went all the way up the wall, but near the bottom there was one oddly sized cupboard. It was actually pretty small, maybe big enough to fit in a couple of shoeboxes. The door was open, and he was pointing at it. So I walked over and shut it, and he just sat there staring at it and still crying. I asked him what was wrong with the cupboard, and he told me that's where his friend stays. He hadn't mentioned this friend in a couple of days. I just told him that it would be impossible since the cupboard was so small. And then he said that his friend wouldn't leave him alone. And then I asked him, "What does your friend want?" And what he said next sent chills down my spine. He told me that his friend was searching for something. And I asked him what his friend was searching for. And he said, his grave. That was pretty unsettling for me to think that my son was being troubled by such a thing at a young age. And then I got kind of aggressive with this friend and asked my son what his friend's name was. And he said George. So out loud in a very confrontational voice I said, "Okay, George, I know you want to find your grave, but my son is only 3 and he needs sleep. He can't help you find your grave. You need to leave him alone or you'll have to deal with me." That made my son kind of laugh. I guess he thought it was funny watching his mom yell like that. I tucked him back in and told him that if George tried to bother him again, to tell him to leave me alone, which proved to be ineffective. The nights to follow, I would wake up to my son screaming in his room. Only these times when I would enter his room, he was hiding under his bed, and he wouldn't open his eyes until I picked him up and turned on the light. He claimed that George would not let him sleep, and he was now mad. He wanted to find his grave. So in order for all of us to get some sleep, I decided to move the boys into my room, and that seemed to work for the rest of the time that we lived there. And on one of the last days that we were there, maybe a couple of weeks after Halloween, we were out in the yard and the boys were playing as we had done so many times. I'd forgotten about that wooden gravestone my ex had pulled out from the well, but there I was sitting on the porch, and something urged me to really look at that piece of wood. I could see that there was writing on it, and it was faded, and had noticed it when we found it, but I hadn't truly read the writing before. I just kind of glanced at it and then threw it out in the yard as a Halloween decoration. So I was just sitting there staring at it with the most overwhelming urge to go and read that writing, and that's what I did. As I read it, my heart sank. The name carved into that wood was George, along with the last name and birth and death date. At the very bottom there was a passage that was mostly worn away, making it impossible to read, but however, the last few words remained intact, and it read, "He will not rest if he leaves his grave." I immediately got up, found my ex-husband, and told him to put that thing back where he had found it. Not long after, we packed up our things and loaded everything into a trailer and left that place as quickly as possible. Eventually, my oldest boy quit having night terrors and things returned to normal. I had hoped that if it was never brought up again, he would forget seeing it, as he was only 3 when it happened. But over a decade later, when he was 13 or so, he brought it up and had some questions. I was stunned that he even remembered it. About a year ago, I wanted to see if anyone was living out there, so I looked the house up on Google Earth, and it's no longer there. I wonder if George ever found his grave. A Halloween story submitted by Anonymous. This story takes place in 1977 when I was 12. I attended middle school in the suburbs of New York City. I was in the 6th grade and would catch a ride with my mom, who worked in an attached elementary school as an administrator. I'd walk over after school, hang out and read or do homework, and then wait for the time that we could go home. On Halloween that year, the school was filled with kids in costumes, parents and parties in many of the classrooms. The sugar content in the kids was high, and so after the party chaos, kids were running to meet their buses, and teachers were winding down their day and cleaning up their classrooms. My mom watched out the window as the buses started to close their doors and prepare to leave. As the buses left, peace once again came to the school. A teacher came to the main office holding the hand of what looked like a toddler about 3 years old. The little girl was crying and said that her mom had put her in the classroom closet and told her to hide and not come out until the school became quiet. My mom asked the little girl if she had a brother or sister that attended the school, and she replied, Tricia, and that she was in kindergarten. My mom ran to the parking lot, flagged down Tricia's school bus, and brought her inside of the office and reunited her with her sister. Tricia came in and was confused to see her little sister. She asked, Penny, what are you doing here, and where is Mom? Penny replied, Mommy told me to hide in the closet. My mom called the mother's house and asked me and several remaining teachers to roam the school grounds to see if I could find their mother. She assumed the mother was delayed somewhere in the building, and my mom repeatedly paged her on the intercom, but no one was able to make contact with her. That was when my mom decided to call the police. The police arrived and questioned the children, and neither knew where their mother had gone. The police, my mom, and other staff took to the phones to try and contact relatives that were listed as emergency contacts, but none of them could figure out where the mother had gone. The afternoon turned to evening, and finally the police were able to contact the father, who unfortunately lived several hours away in another state with his new family. My mom and I volunteered to stay and wait for him, and I, then with my mother's urging, took the kids trick-or-treating in the surrounding neighborhood. Tricia had her princess costume on from her earlier class party, and I took a wool blanket from the nurse's office, tied it around the toddler's neck, and proclaimed her a superhero, and off we went. As the girls walked hand in hand, Penny told Tricia that Mommy told me that she was going away forever. Tricia stopped, bent down, and asked her exactly what their mom had said. She replied that Mommy said to hide in the closet and a nice teacher would eventually find her when it became quiet. She went on to say, Mommy told me that she loves us very much, and then shut the closet door. As we weaved through the streets gathering candy, we heard a tremendous car crash close by. It sounded violent and serious, and sirens wailed for what seemed like forever, and they didn't seem to stop. It was then that I knew instantly the horrific crash was their mom, and that she was dead. I took the girls' hands and headed back to the school. We got back into my mom's office, and I pulled my mom aside and told her what I had heard. The phone rang a few minutes later. It was the police headquarters, and they informed us that the mother indeed was dead. She drove her car directly into the path of a 16-year-old student driver and his dad who was out for driving lessons. She killed them as well as herself. As we waited for the girls' dad to arrive, my mom instructed me to not tell the girls of their mother's death. She explained that it wasn't our place to break that kind of news to such young children. I sat silently watching the girls explore their candy haul, and it was then that I had to come to the sudden realization that their lives, the 16-year-old boy's family, and even our own world, would never be the same again. We ordered pizza and ate it in silence and waited for the dad. Hours passed. We read books in the library, and the girls eventually fell asleep in the nurse's office. And finally, around 9 p.m., the kid's dad walked into the office. The police took him aside and broke the news that the mother had taken her own life and the lives of a father and son who was just out learning how to drive. The father then gathered the children and prepared to leave. It was then that Tricia realized that something was terribly wrong and began to cry, very hard. Seeing her sister crying, Penny broke into tears too. Tricia yelled that her mommy wouldn't miss Halloween. Their father sat on the floor of the office, looked her in the eyes, and broke the news that Mom wasn't coming home again, and that they were going to move to New Jersey with his new family. He gathered them in his arms and headed to the exit. The two both wailed for their mom as they left. My mom turned off the lights, locked the doors, and we headed to the car. The parking lot finally emptied of cars, and we drove home in silence. My mom and I began to cry as we drove past the accident scene. The two cars were so entangled that it was impossible to tell if there was more than a single car. I thought of the innocent victims who were at the wrong place at the wrong time. I mean, how can a dad and a boy just learning to drive die by a woman who wanted to end her own life? Why would she take the lives of innocent people, too? Penny and Tricia never came back to that school. I recently visited with my 90-year-old mom and asked her if she remembered Tricia and Penny. She said yes, that she too would never forget them. Over the last almost 50 years, she wondered why would Tricia's mom allow her 6-year-old to return to an empty house. She made sure to place Penny in a safe place, but never thought of the trauma Tricia would endure waiting in an empty house for her family that wouldn't return. Tricia and Penny, I hope your life is filled with love and laughter. I hope the victims of that family were able to forgive the mother, who was just so distraught that she saw no other way to live.